Good morning, happy Friday, and we have a name. Welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. So this name was actually inspired by Jennifer Aston, who had suggested the name Andrea Renee Knits It All, like Clarissa Tells It All, which was definitely a show from my childhood, and it all of a sudden reminded me of my old knitting blog that I used to have back like pre-Ravelry. And it was called I'll Knit If I Want To. And I was just like, oh, that's the name. So welcome to I'll Knit If I Want To. And today I'm wearing a sneak peek of my newest sweater that is coming out a week from Tuesday, I think. Yeah, a week from Tuesday. So I have had some people ask me to show like, what am I working on right now? And this actually just came off my needles a couple days ago. I've knit 2 of these. I'll show you a little sneak of the other one. So this is the first one that I knit. I really love these colors. And this is all out of a Verb for Keeping Warm Their Flock, which is just stunning yarn. I really love it. I've had it in my stash for actually a few years because I was like, it has to be perfect whatever I use it for. So it took me a long time to decide what to use it for. So I'm really excited to finally get it knit up, and I'll show you some of the details. You can see here, it has this really sweet little picot. Sorry, that window's a little bright over there. Sweet little picot edges, which was inspired by my Saskia socks, which I don't have up here right now, but they're cute little anklets that have a picot cuff. So anyways, keep an eye out for that. Sign up for my newsletter. There's a link in the show description. That is the only place to get my introductory discounts on my patterns. So if you are excited about the sweater, make sure to sign up, and let's get started with some questions. All right, question number 1. Question number 1. What knitting technique books do you have in your library? I was given my grandmother's knitting stitch dictionary and I love it. I would like to expand my library further, but feel slightly overwhelmed when I search for books. Any suggestions are much appreciated. So I love knitting books. I have a pretty extensive knitting library. I love stitch dictionaries. I love vintage knitting books, all kinds. I really love knitting books and sewing books and embroidery books, but I did want to show a couple. So there's a reason I knit more than one sample of this sweater that's coming out next week. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about this, especially for anybody else out there who's an aspiring designer or likes to kind of do things on their own, maybe modify, and also just a little bit about myself as far as my kind of design path. So I get asked a lot if I went to school for this, and I didn't. I'm completely self-taught. My grandma taught me how to knit when I was about 9, and I desperately wanted to make knitting my job when I was in my early 20s. Couldn't really figure out how to go about that. There's not a ton of information out there. I think it's getting better now, but back when I was attempting this, there really wasn't information on how to even go about it. And so much of what I have learned over the years it's all been trial and error. I very much design on the needles. So when I'm designing something, I knit it and I see if it works, and I tear a lot of knitting out and I try it again. And, I'm always trying to achieve that better fit or interesting technique or whatever it may be. It is very much a constant learning process, which I think is one of the reasons why I love it so much. I'm very drawn to knitting because there's always more out there. There's more to do. There's just so much you could learn about knitting over an entire lifetime and never learn it all. So when I knit my first sample of this sweater's Even Fall is gonna be the name. I really love how this one fits, but I found that the yoke shaping wasn't perfect yet. And so after some tinkering and playing around, I found a different way to basically, like, different places to put my increases that I found smoothed out the yoke. And it's just, again, it's been this constant, like, just trying things. And I am somebody who has like completely knit it out. My process is slow. But anyways, I'm really excited to feel like I really like how this new sample fits. But so for people out there who are kind of wondering where I do get information from besides just winging it and seeing what happens on my needles, these are two books that I have referenced since I really got into knitting when I was a teenager, and continue to reference them all the time. This is one of my absolute favorite. This is Knitting from the Top by Barbara Walker. So I highly recommend this one. These are both published by the Schoolhouse Press. You can buy directly from them. I'm sure a lot of local yarn stores have them. But if you enjoy top-down knitting, this tells you how to do so many different styles, and it's how I designed my first sweater was with guide knits from this book. So I really love that. And then Elizabeth Zimmerman, I have shared this before, but I don't think I've done it here. You know, again, I think one of the reasons why I did even attempt to ever create my own patterns is totally because of Elizabeth Zimmerman. The way she writes her patterns in her books is very much, I lost my word. Well, she very much gives you the confidence, empowering, that's the word I was looking for. She's very empowering. She totally makes you feel like, well, I can do this. Like, if I have my yarn and my needles and I figure out my gauge, like, that's all I need and I can create anything. I mean, it's pretty much all either like tubes or flat pieces, triangles and rectangles. And so I really love this because in all of her books, I mean, I have a couple more right here, Knitter's Almanac. I think I have all of her books and I would recommend all of them. This is a really great one too, Knitting Around. I love hers as well because they're very conversational. Like, I'll giggle while I read them. My husband even got me, you can buy a DVD of her old show she used to do, and it's I will put it on a knit with my kids. So anyways, these I have found very helpful. They've made me feel like, hey, I'm just gonna try this. So those would be two of my big recommendations as far as expanding your knit library. Really anything by either of these authors. So my favorite, again, I had pretty much all of Elizabeth's books. And then my favorite stitch dictionaries are also Barbara Walker's. They're really fabulous. So next question. I would like to know what your favorite method to block hats. Do you give them a bath with a wool wash or just spray them with water? As I was taught, do you use a head form, a balloon, or simply pin them on a blocking mat? So I thought this was a great question this week because right now is the spring DRK Weekend Knit Along Challenge. We're doing my Flicker and Flame hats, which I'll show you those again just in case you missed the last few episodes. So we are doing these hats right now, and so for both of these I did block them on balloons. That so far is my favorite method. I would like to find something that's a little bit more environmentally friendly than balloons, but that's what I do right now. Is I do block them just as I would any knit. So I run a warm bath with a little wool wash and I toss them in there. If I was just washing hats, I would then just lay them flat to dry. Like, I only do the balloon thing for the first time when I know I want to take pictures of it. I want to block it out. I find that once something's been blocked properly the first time, for their washings, they seem to kind of want to remember that shape pretty easily. But I basically like partially blow up the balloon, put the hat on it, and then I finish blowing up the balloon and I just let it dry on there. And then I pop it and take it off once it's dry. And it does a really nice job, especially with color work. You know, it'll help stretch out, get those stitches where they need to be. And the thing I like about it is that it doesn't stretch out the brim. So I have a little head, and if my brims get stretched out, it's a challenge for me to keep my brims small enough for my head. So I really like that I can block out, like this is the slouchier one, this is the sport weight. And so this one has a really nice slouchy fit, but again, especially with a slouchy hat, I want it to have like a pretty nice tight brim. So that's what I do. All right, next question. You talked about your most challenging design being wool and honey. Which of all your designs is the one that gave you the most pleasure to create, or the one that you really felt you were getting the most out of your creative juices? Another question is, there a time of day when you feel you are more creative? So I love this question. I am going to chat while I grab the pattern. So yes, I absolutely just in general function better in the morning. I am a complete morning person. I used to be a professional baker, and I very much many days of the week get up at 5:30. I really, like, I'm one of those people that greets the day like, yes, it's morning. And then in the evening as it gets dark, I'm like, oh. So my brain just tends to work better in the morning. I feel excited and happy, and usually have coffee. So yeah, morning is my everything time. That's when I have the most energy. It's when I feel most creative and just sparky. But so as far as the design that gave me the most pleasure to create and that really got those creative juices going, it's definitely gonna be Find Your Fade. So if you don't know the story, here is Find Your Fade. It goes from this beautiful deep golden color, and it fades through to this really rich hot pinky fuchsia color. So if you don't know Find Your Fade, there's the shape of it. I knit this shawl right after I had my second baby. And at that time, my husband was still working, and I was squeezing in design time around, you know, taking care of my 2-year-old and my infant. And I was feeling pretty depleted after having him, and I really needed something to kind of fill back up. Like I needed a little me time. And so I got it in my head that I should reorganize my yarn stash, which if you have a decent amount of yarn, it's definitely one of those things that gets worse before it gets better. Like once you get it all off the shelves, I swear it's like the yarn has babies, and all of a sudden there's more yarn, and then you have to put it back on the shelves. So I did that. I pulled it all off, and this was shortly after I had really started getting excited about indie dyed yarn and speckles. And so that was one of the main things I was really organizing. And it was actually these skeins. So this one's called Fool's Gold. This is all hedgehog fibers. And this one is called, I think, Sari, S-A-R-I, I think. And do you see how in the gold, there's specks of pink? And then in the pink, there's these specks of gold. So those were lying next to each other. And I just all of a sudden was like, I think I can get from like one to the other. And so I started just lying skeins out that gradually moved out of yellow and towards that pink. And then I cast on a new to me shawl shape. And I really love simple lace like this. It's basically just a yarn over, and then you knit two together, or you decrease a stitch. So slip, slip, knit, whatever it may be. And I just went for it. I had no plan. I wasn't necessarily planning on releasing it. It was just a completely selfish knit. Like, I just want to knit this. And the whole time I had so much fun watching those little speckles cross my needles and moving from one color to the next. And it was so engaging. It's just really what I needed at that time. And then it was summertime when I knit it, and I always had a baby on me. You know, I always had my son strapped to me in a carrier, and so I would just wear it like this, and yeah, I loved it. So that would be that project. So again, that's Find Your Fade. I'll throw a link to it below. I'll write myself a note because I didn't think of that before and I'll forget. All right, so I love this next question, rowing out. So if you don't know what rowing out is, it's basically when you are knitting I don't have anything I can grab, a stockinette stitch fabric, and you end up seeing ridges. And what that means is that your purl stitch is using a different amount of yarn than your knit stitch. So that is what causes rowing out, is your tension is changing. And so when that happens, every other row, like you can see this is a purposeful, obviously designed aspect here on the sweater, but just imagine like ditches every other row in that stockinette stitch fabric. Like it looks like ripples. So typically this is caused by, I've heard that it happens more with continental knitting than with English style. I think that's right. Because of the way the yarn's wrapped, you use a little more yarn with the purl, which is why it ends up having that uneven tension. I think that's right. Was it English style? Anyways, it doesn't matter. If it's happening, it's happening. But generally what's happening is that your purl is looser. I apparently am the exception to that rule. I was actually purling so tight. I think I had heard that it happened from being a loose purler, so I like way overcompensated and was just like really wrapping my pearls. And so it used to happen to be really bad. Yeah, it is right that it is typically continental that this happens too. But again, it doesn't really matter. If it's happening, it's happening. But the point of that and me sharing that is when I learned continental, because I needed to for teaching, I wanted to be able to show everything whichever way somebody knit, I found that my rowing out stopped. And that's how I realized that I was being the opposite of most people, and I was really wrapping those pearls too tight. So when I switched to continental, it loosened up my purling, and now my tension is super even. So ways to fix it. One, try a different knitting style. That might be your fix. It was for me. If you don't want to learn a new knitting style, totally fine. You can also do my other favorite trick. I'm just going to grab my needles over here. So one option, if you have interchangeable needles, is you would put a different size needle on each tip. So again, this is only going to happen when you're working flat. If you're working in the round, you're not switching between knits and purls generally, and your tension will be even. But when you're knitting flat, what you can do is use a smaller needle on your purl rows and a bigger needle on your knit rows. So if you have interchangeable needles, I have right here a US 8 5mm, and then for my purl rows I would put a US 7 4.5mm. So then you don't even have to think about it, because that needle change might be all you need to have to stop rowing out. So again, I think I've mentioned this in a previous episode. I've definitely mentioned it in my newsletter. The one thing I wish somebody had told me back when I was a teenager and I was really, really getting into knitting and buying loads of knitting needles, which are pretty pricey, I really wish somebody had said, hey, buy interchangeables, because you can get some really pretty decently priced interchangeable sets, and then you have everything you need. I like to put mine in my Maxwell. This is from Magpie Fibers. So this holds all my tips and my cords and like hooks and notions. There's a pouch right here where I keep notions as well. But this way I have everything I need. When I was traveling a lot for work, I'm definitely a magic looper. So having circular needles and different length cords, I can do absolutely anything I would need to do with knitting. And I really love Chow Goo. Those are the ones that come with the red cords. Haya are also great. I just love the Chow Goos. Their cords tend to have a little bit better memory. They stay nice and round. I used to have Hayas, but sometimes their cords will kink a little. And I've tried them all. I've tried lots of different interchangeables. I also like these. They have a really, there's my boop. They have a really smooth join, so your yarn never gets caught as you're pushing it past. And you just want to make sure to lock on your tips. I know I have mentioned this before, but I highly recommend you can even just use, one commenter said rubber band, to lock on those tips so they don't get loose, and then they're perfect. So, rowing out. Different size needle tips. Generally speaking, and you can do a swatch to see if you're like me and maybe you're strangling your little pearls, or if your pearls are loosey-goosey, so you might have to play with it to see which one you're doing tighter than the other. But generally speaking, you would use your bigger needle for your knits, for your knit side of your work, and then you would use your smaller needle for your pearl side of your work. And that will hopefully take care of the rowing out. All right, question 5. I've seen you wear shawls in a way that the two ends wrap around your front and tie in the back. I love this look and can never figure out how to make it stay put. Could you show us? So I also had an email, or maybe it was a comment, I can't remember, of somebody asking if I could show how to wear moon whistle. So I thought I would show both of these to you. So I have moon whistle. I don't want to roll my chair over my sweater here. Okay. Yeah, you can see me. All right, so in general, to wear shawls, I get this question a lot. In Knit Stars season 2, I was one of the teachers, and I actually do like a 20-minute segment. I don't know if they ended up editing it down. It was really long, showing how to wear like all the shawls I had designed at that time, because it's a question I get all the time. They can be tricky to figure out how to wear. So in general, with shawls, this is an asymmetrical triangle shawl that you only increase on one edge. Again, it's called a moon whistle. I start with it, I just take kind of the longish edge and I just throw it around. And then what I like to do is just whip this side around so that this almost goes off center, because I find I'd prefer that things didn't point like super straight down. I kind of like to kick it off to the side a little. So that's really all I do. I like a generous size shawl because it's just going to be easier to wrap around you when you have a good length of the arms on either side to kind of hang down. You aren't fighting with it falling off of your shoulder all the time. Sometimes if it's really windy out, I'll even take the ends and kind of tuck them under to keep them secure. But that is the general way I wear a shawl. And then for the old school way, tied behind the back, you just center the shawl, the wingspan on your neck, and cross it over your body. And again, you're going to want a generous wingspan on your shawl to do this. And then you just tie it behind, whoop, like that. If you're having trouble with it coming loose, you could definitely double knot it if you have enough length. You could even put, because this is covered, so you could even put a hair tie, like a rubber band around there, and that's gonna help secure it. But I find that is pretty good. It probably depends a little bit too on your yarn. If it's a more slippery yarn, then you might need something a little like more substantial, but otherwise that should do. I'm just gonna toss those over there. All right, and I have a little bonus question. So this is a little more personal, not as knit related, but I've had a few of these, so I wanted to talk about it a little bit. So this question is, I've recently been diagnosed celiac, and through the process, I've noticed my relationship to knitting has changed. I've always enjoyed knitting, but it has now become my solace and comfort. When you were diagnosed with your autoimmune diseases, how did your relationship to knitting change? Did any of those changes affect your design process? Oh, and any tips for the newly diagnosed celiac? Anything you know that you wish you would have known at the beginning? So, so for anyone who doesn't know, I've mentioned it in the past, but I have celiac and Hashimoto's, and those are two autoimmune disorders. Both of them require the removal of gluten. Celiac, absolutely. But Hashimoto's is one they don't know a ton about, but there seems to be a huge correlation between gluten and Hashimoto's, because what happens is our body ends up thinking that our thyroid is similar to gluten, and it starts when we eat gluten, it starts attacking our thyroid. So they have noticed that people with Hashimoto's tend to do a lot better with the removal of gluten. And a lot of autoimmune disorders tend to be linked to that. So I have always turned to my knitting for solace and for celebration. I feel like knitting holds all my ups and downs of life, and there's quite a big comfort in that for me. I think it's also a little bit of, I always think of it as a gift to myself, especially there can be frustration when you first get a diagnosis like this, especially if it's completely new to you, you have no idea how to begin eating gluten-free. Maybe you're in a community that there's not a lot of gluten-free options. Your family might not be super helpful or supportive. And in the beginning, it can feel a little bit like your body's betrayed you. Like, it's like, why me? Why isn't it doing what it should do? And, again, I used to be a baker. Thankfully, I started off as a gluten-free baker, just by happenstance. That was the first job I ever got. But then I worked very much as just a regular gluten-y baker. I even made the joke before I got my diagnosis. I was traveling for work and my host said, oh, do you have any eating preferences? Like, can you have gluten? And I said, I love gluten. And then like a week later, I got my diagnosis. So it was a challenge. I got the Hashimoto's diagnosis before the celiac, and I was working with a functioning medicine doctor. If you have any in your area and you have the means to do so, I do recommend a functioning medicine doctor because they tend to be really great with autoimmune disease and have a really great holistic approach to them that's all centered around diet, because autoimmune disease is so highly affected by diet, especially with something like celiac. If anybody doesn't know what celiac is, it means you're allergic to gluten, basically. So that first year I tried to remove all gluten and I got frustrated and I started eating gluten again. And then basically about going on like a year ago, I just was feeling really, really bad. So my symptoms mainly show up as chronic fatigue and joint pain, which certainly affects my knitting, and brain fog. So like just not even being able to think straight. And I would get sick constantly. Pretty much every time I traveled, I would come home with laryngitis and upper respiratory infections and just was always sick. So it got really bad again a year ago. So I sought out a functioning dietitian who again told me to get off of gluten. And then we have moved to a new state and I had to find a new doctor. And it was actually then that I got my celiac diagnosis. So that really helped seal the deal for me. And I will say one of the hardest things was detoxing gluten. So it was about 3 weeks of headaches and I couldn't sleep, but I was so tired. It was really unexpected and intense. But after 3 weeks, all of a sudden I started to feel better. My joint pain is almost completely gone. So I think as far as you got to kind of get through that beginning bit, and then there's now it's so many people offer gluten-free options even at restaurants. You do have to tell them that you're celiac and make sure, there's certain things you can't, if they use a fryer that has gluten stuff in it, you can't have that. But there's tons of resources. One of my favorite cookbook authors is Danielle Walker, and that is especially for me. I also avoid a lot of other things like refined sugar and dairy and things like that. So her cookbook is delightful, really good recipes. She has 4 and she has a new book coming out this fall called Food Saved Me. So you might be interested in something like that. But I recommend generally, this is getting long-winded, isn't it? I don't know how many people want to keep listening to this. So generally I recommend, if you're on Instagram, follow some gluten-free accounts so that you feel like you're building up a community. Find some gluten-free meals that you love at home. I generally tend to focus on just eating a lot of veggies and some protein. but there's great Jovial, makes a great gluten-free pasta that like my kids love. So I think just having some basic, simple recipes that you really enjoy. And I will say, I'll leave you with this, it gets easier. In the beginning, I used to be vegan. It's easier to be vegan, I think, traveling and stuff like that. But now that I have been doing it for over a year and have had a lot of practice, and my family has shown up huge for me. I think once you really share with those that you love, just how big of a change this is. And cross-contamination is a pretty big deal. So really expressing to them, like, this is what this will like make me feel if I'm not careful. Then my family's really been like awesome about being like, wait, should I not have this, around you? What should we do? I do for traveling. I have a little suitcase that has my cutting board, a knife. I actually travel with a little blender. So that's the other thing, is I did have to basically restock everything in my kitchen. Like, there's just certain things that you can't get the gluten back out of. So cutting boards is big, colanders, pots and pans, things like that. You can find all this online, so Google it. But know that you're not alone. Grab your knitting and get support from your family and friends where you can, because that's pretty big. But sorry, that was so rambly. I hope it was helpful. I should have thought that one through, so I could have given a more cohesive answer. But anyways, I guess that's it. Happy Friday, everyone. I hope to see you back here next week with some more questions, and have a great weekend. It is gonna be cold here all of a sudden, so I plan on knitting and maybe spinning some yarn. All right, have a great weekend.